Hey there, survivors! I'm your host, Douglas here at Drownboy Productions, bringing you another Scream mask guide. But yet again, not a movie mask guide, we have another TV series mask guide. We recently covered Scream Seasons 1 and 2 in one whole video because for the most part they kind of had a lot of the same masks. But today we're going to be covering something that is a step away from the Lakewood slasher and a return to form with the return of Ghostface in Scream Resurrection. Or Scream 3, Scream Season 3, whatever you want to call it. This thing has been known by a variety of different names, and technically it's not even like an MTV Scream. This one is kind of like a VH1 Scream. So yeah, very, very odd, but for most fans this is known simply as Scream Resurrection. As I mentioned in the mask guide for Seasons 1 and 2, a lot of people never gave that show a chance simply because of the lack of Ghostface. And I guess that was definitely heard and felt because after 2 seasons of the Lakewood slasher, they just kind of left us on a cliffhanger and moved on to a whole other cast, and they brought back Ghostface, of course. Even with the inclusion of Ghostface, a lot of people never really gave this series a chance, and they also kind of had a really unfortunate rollout due to the whole Harvey Weinstein thing. I think this ended up getting shelved for like a year, maybe 2, but I think it was at least a year from when it was supposed to be released, and then we kind of got it delayed in like a 2-night event, I think it was. Overall, it didn't really get the best treatment. Personally, I still think Season 3 is a fun addition of the franchise. It is still a very fun story surrounding Ghostface. And of course, that's what we're here to talk about today, guys. We're here to talk about the various different Ghostface masks used in Scream Season 3 Resurrection. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I guess we'll go ahead and start out with the lesser used masks and work our way up. So let's go ahead and start with a very simple, very easy one, the hard plastic ultra white mask. These, of course, have been used in Screams 5 and 6 since then, but these were initially used in Scream Resurrection. They do not have a very heavy presence in the entire series, but they do make an appearance, oddly enough, in the flashback where there's the younger kids wearing this. I think it's Marcus specifically that is wearing the hard plastic ultra white. But in other scenes, they're wearing different masks. It's just a very weird thing that happens in this series. There's another mask we'll mention next that actually only makes one appearance, and it's very out of place, but yes, these are worn by the kids as well as in Mr. Fade's party. There are, of course, a ton of extras that are wearing Ghostface masks, some of those being ultra white masks, some of them being the hard plastic mask. So as I just mentioned, there's a mask that makes a single appearance in this series, and I think it's actually the only appearance it makes in the entire franchise, thankfully. But this is an odd one, a very, very out-of-place addition. I don't want to say too much and spoil too much, but we're in the middle of watching a character be interrogated about possibly being Ghostface, and the main cast who have this character tied up toss a mask in his lap, and they're like, "Oh yeah, what's this?" And that was pretty much the same exact reaction I had when I was watching this for the first time, because yeah, what is that? It clearly was not the mask that this character had previously. It does not make an appearance, like I said, anywhere else in the entire franchise, so I'm not really sure why it even made it on screen here, unless maybe Funworld requested it so it would help sell these masks. Otherwise, I don't see how they were able to film this, and they had literally no other options on set. Such a weird thing. But yeah, of course, the mask that I'm talking about is another plastic Ghostface mask, but not the hard plastic one we just took a look at. It's the cheap dollar store plastic mask. And I think it's funny because in the middle of interrogating him, he does mention like, "Oh yeah, they're only $2 or whatever." Technically they're $3, buddy. $3 from the dollar store. And it's this. I mean, they're not horrible, okay, who am I kidding? Yeah, these are pretty bad. As much as we all hate ultra whites, I think we can all agree that we would rather have an ultra white or even one of the hard plastic ultra whites over this. But yeah, it had to make its final appearance and only appearance in the franchise in this one shot. And it is so damn weird because this character is not wearing one of these masks previously. It's not explained where they get it. It just shows up. I guess in that way it feels very much so reminiscent of the original Scream, how there's so many back and forth, different masks and different shots, even though it's supposed to be the very same mask. And yeah, that happens a lot in this series. Moving right along, we have the second most used mask in the series. This makes an appearance in several different places. Some make sense, some not so much. We have the dreaded ultra wide. That's right, guys. you didn't think they were going to make this series and not include the Ultra White, right? The Ultra White does make a lot of appearances. In fact, pretty much outside of the killer mask, you are going to see Ultra Whites. And even then, sometimes the Ultra White is a killer mask. I'll explain. The Ultra White is strewn throughout the series. It is, of course, the primary mask that is worn by the kids when they're trick-or-treating. In the flashbacks, it's also seen in Mr. Fade's party. There is a mask that gets crushed later on that is actually supposed to be an aged mask. And it's not a real Fun World mask. If you look closely, you can tell that it's actually a plaster cast of an Ultra White. The shape of it is very clearly an Ultra White, and it's also very clearly not a real mask because you can see that there's like solid plaster in the eyes, not eye mesh. And yeah, that thing gets crumbled to pieces. I'm sure you guys probably know the shot if you've seen the series, but oddly enough, that mask goes back and forth between being an Ultra White and an EU. And I guess also technically in one scene it's a hard plastic mask. But yeah, as far as where else the Ultra White was used, there's a scene where they burn a Ghostface mask, that's an Ultra White. At the football field, that's an Ultra White. The robbery that takes place, which is the character that ends up getting interrogated, he's very clearly wearing an Ultra White. Oddly enough, even during some of the killer reveals, whenever they remove their mask, it's very clearly an Ultra White. And sometimes when these masks are used in some of these scenes, especially when they're worn by another character as like a red herring mask, or they're left behind at the scene of crimes, which sound familiar? You can even see where they've removed the shroud, there'll be like strings of thread still poking through the mask, oddly enough. So yeah, the Ultra White does make quite a few appearances, and even to some degree, it does function as a killer mask. Alright, now that I've managed to set my lights back up after knocking everything down, let's go ahead and proceed with the final mask we'll be taking a look at today, the main killer mask. By the way guys, don't forget to show up to Mr. Fade's party. It's only going to be 20 bucks at the door, and this thing is going to be killer. Alright, let me remove this fella from his plastic prison. Here we have the main style mask that is used by the killer in MTV's Scream the Series Resurrection, Scream Season 3. This mask is kind of just known as the Scream Resurrection EU Dwarf Hood mask. These actually were never mass-produced and sold to fans. So there are very few fans out there who do have these, and a majority of the ones who do have them received them directly from Fun World, and they were numbered copies. Now, from what I understand, not all copies that were sent to set were numbered, but a lot of them were, and they had MTV Edition and a number written on the side of the chin over here. As for the qualities of the mask in question, from what I understand, the Resurrection EU mask was pulled from the very same mold as the HHN EU masks. However, as far as production quality, they're not quite the same, and boy do I wish they were, because the HHNs, as we all know, are one of the nicest quality Ghostface masks ever made. Now, what we do get with the Resurrection EUs as far as the mask itself is a matte white finish mask. So these are not like the glossy finishes that you would see on the collector's edition masks or a Scream 4 production run mask. I wish I could actually put them side by side, but this one is a much more matte bone white. Just trust me on this one. Then as far as the paint on the eyes, nose, and mouth, it's a much glossier paint as well. The quality of the masks are a very thick, stiff EU, so they hold their shape very well. And of course, as you all can tell, they come with the production style or collector's edition style dwarf hood, as we call it. And these are a little bit different than your standard collector's edition or production run hoods. Of course, the shroud still has that nice executioner kind of point here in the back, and it has the shoulder piece going all the way around, which I believe is a little bit longer than the production run ones. I haven't put them side by side recently, but I'm pretty sure they're a little bit longer. I do have some older photos from when I first received this, showing them side by side and comparing them. But regardless, they're not wildly different from those collector's edition masks, but as far as the quality of the vinyl on the mask itself, and even to some degree like the shape of the paint, it is a good bit different from your standard collector's edition and production run masks. Now, the biggest downfall with these, in my opinion, is the fact that they do have the blue spots. You can actually see it sometimes on screen in the show, but not too often. I have seen some copies that come out unscathed, but unfortunately I have also seen other copies in the hands of collectors that are pretty riddled with the blue dots. And yet again, that's just very unfortunate, especially being that I feel like had already perfected that problem with the HHN. It's really unfortunate to see them come back on a mask like this that is a specialty run, but Still, they are very, very cool masks. Now, for those of you out there looking for a mask to fit into your collection that's going to replace this, or be a good replacement for this, I would strongly recommend a 2016 EU. They seem to be pretty much the same quality. Very often, those have a very similar eye and nose paint shape, or at least from what I've been able to observe, they seem very, very similar to the shape of the Resurrection masks. Yet again, I don't want to give away too much, but essentially, a character gets killed wearing a ghost face mask when they're a kid. You kind of see this in the opening of the series in the very intro, but there's more to be found out. I almost forgot to mention, but this mask also does make an appearance in another very interesting way. Technically, one of these becomes the very first aged mask. That's right, before Scream 6 ever did it, there was already the idea for doing like an aged ghost face. But there's also several scenes where that mask changes form. At first, when we see the kid wearing it, it's very clearly an ultra-white mask. Then, at one point, we see it as a hard plastic mask. Then, at another point, just before he's like fully attacked, I believe, we see it turn into one of these, an EU mask. And when we see it later, before it gets crushed to pieces, it also does appear again as an EU mask, then turns into like the plaster cast that gets crushed. It's a very weird situation, but yeah, I don't know. It kind of happened in the initial Scream, it kind of has happened in other Screams, so I guess it's not too uncommon, just another odd, interesting fact that makes for some fun mask history. It's also worth mentioning, as far as the tags that these came on, there were some pictures behind the scenes that show these on set with black and red style tags, oddly enough, as well as some of them with the all cardboard color tags, which are typically like the prototype style tags that Funworld will attach to a mask when they're still finishing the final design for the tag. Not really sure why they had black and red tags, and to be fair, I'm also not really sure why they were tagged at all if these were never intended to be sold to the public, because they're very clearly a different run. It's made from a different time period, so it's not like they just had these already sitting around. So very peculiar situation overall, but the more you know. I hope you all have enjoyed the Mask Guide series, and I hope some of you have been able to use this. I hope it's been helpful. I love you all, thank you for watching, and see you next time.